Clunes Booktown Festival is a celebration of the book, filled with bookstalls, author talks, workshops and thought-provoking conversations in the historic Victorian township of Clunes.
I'd just like to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Djayawurrung people, the traditional custodians of this land, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. I also acknowledge I am very proud to live and work on the lands of the Yugambeh people of the southern Gold Coast, and I pay my respects to my elders as well. But we're here to talk about all things romantasy. And it's so nice to see so many enthusiastic faces in the crowd. And I'm joined by three amazing authors who are writing in this space. So on the end, I have the amazing Keshe Chow. Keshe is a Malaysian-born Chinese-Australian author of fantasy, romance and spec fic. She won the 2020 Pareto Prize, the 2021 Rachel Funari Prize, and the 2021 Yarra Literature Prize, the 2022 Vic Prem's Prize for Unpublished Manuscript, and the 2023 Uncharted Thrilling Story Award. So I just love that progression there. And now she's a published author with The Girl with No Reflection, which is her debut. If we're lucky, she'll also talk about her new one, which is coming out later this year. Next to her, we have Alexandra Almond. Alexandra lives and works on Boonwurrung land in Melbourne with her tennis ball-obsessed Labrador, Captain. Before turning her hand to writing, previous roles included stable hand, clown, HR assistant, flower buyer, procurement manager, cleaner, human-centred designer, which is her current day job. I'll stop there. She likes trains, books, dogs and cups of tea, so we're, I think, in the right crowd. And next to me, I have the amazing Lili Wilkinson. Lili is the award-winning author of more than 20 books for young people, including A Hunger of Thorns, which won the Vic Prem's Literary Award and was a CBCA honour book. Lili has a PhD from the University of Melbourne and is a passionate advocate for YA. Her latest books are the Brave Poor series and Unhallowed Halls. I'm Alex Adsett. I'm an Australian literary agent. I've been in the book industry for coming up to 30 years. And while my agency represents all kinds of genre and fiction and non-fiction and kids' books, reading romance and fantasy since I was a kid, and it is very dear to my heart. So I'm very excited to be chairing this panel. So if you could join me in welcoming our three amazing authors. Whew, that was hopefully as much talking as you're going to get from me. Can I get us started by getting you guys to tell us in a few minutes about your latest books in the romantasy area? So maybe give us your premise, the protagonist. I'll be asking about the love interest later. But Lili, if we can start with you.
All right, so Unhallowed Halls is a dark academia YA fantasy. It is set in a gloomy boarding school in Scotland that's like a crumbly old castle in the middle of a moor. And the protagonist is Paige, who is from Florida. And something really terrible happened at her school in Florida. She doesn't remember what it is, but all she knows is that she has scars on her hands, a teacher is dead, and her ex-girlfriend, every time she sees her, all she will do is scream. So she has run away to Gathian College, which is this extremely eccentric boarding school in Scotland where there's no technology allowed. And all of the students at the school are very rich, very intelligent, very problematic young people. So they are the Nepo babies who have gotten expelled from all of the other schools. And so there's no tech, there's no communication with the outside world. They have a very strict curriculum of like ancient Greek and Latin. And it's just like, you know, they wear very tweedy uniforms. It's very like appealing boarding school stuff. And Paige desperately wants to belong here because she has decided that feelings are bad and bad things happen when you have feelings. And so all she wants to do is live a life of the mind. She doesn't need friends, but of course she finds herself absorbed into a squad of lovable weirdos and then discovers that everybody has secrets and that there is some demonic energy happening at this school that maybe the teachers are involved in. And so there's lots of tarot cards, there's witchiness, there's a fae boy in a kilt who talks to trees, and like just all of my favourite things.
Amazing. Alexandra.
Thoroughly Disenchanted is a cosy romantasy. 4 friends, a cursed, magical country house, and a weekend away that has lasted a century. So 100 years ago, Oliver and Genevieve and a couple of friends drove up from Melbourne to spend the weekend at Riverswood, which is a country property Genevieve had recently inherited from her great uncle. they're still there. And not by choice. They have tried everything that they can to get out of there over the last 100 years and nothing's worked. They're not completely isolated. So on storm nights, the big gates of rivers would open to stranded travellers, and Genevieve and Oliver welcome them in, starved of company, sick of each other's company, and also keen, desperate for news of the outside world. They also hear about the outside world from their friend Finn, who came with them for that fateful weekend and somehow has been able to come and go as he pleased the last 100 years. So he keeps them up to date with the world outside. He also brings them supplies of wine and peanut butter, among other things. And then one dark and stormy night, Ella arrives. And she's not like other visitors that they've had, and she turns everything on its head. So Ella is the catalyst for everything that happens in that sort of last crazy week as they try to escape from Riverswood for the last time.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Keshe?
So The Girl with No Reflection is a young adult fantasy romance novel, and it's basically inspired by Chinese mythology, but it's about a princess called Ying who gets sucked into a mirror world, and once she arrives in the mirror world, she discovers that the reflections in the mirror aren't actually our reflections, but they're totally sentient creatures that are cursed to mimic us and have been cursed for the last 1,000 of years, but now they're angry and they want to come out of the mirror and basically attack us and take our places. So Ying is tasked with shutting the barrier between the real world and the mirror world. But when she's in the mirror world, she meets basically the reflection version of the prince that she was supposed to marry, and she likes him better. So she has to close the barrier, but she's fallen in love with a man who's going to be stuck on the other side.
Aww. So much heartbreak in these books. Now, we are here to talk about romantasy, but we need to sort of try to lock down a bit of a definition, because romance has been around forever, fantasy has been around forever, romance and fantasy has already done and been around. So what is it about this new label that makes it what it is? Is it just the same thing we've been reading with a new fancy hashtag, or is there something unique about this moment in time that we're seeing? Alexandra.
Yeah, I have thoughts. It's not new, like you say. It's been around forever. People have been writing things that we would now call romantasy for a very long time. But the origins of fantasy are quite different. They might have romantic elements to them, but I think traditional fantasy is very much more about the fantastical elements and the drama and the dragons and the wars of the worlds and all of that sort of thing. And romance is very much a secondary element. So my take on romantasy is it's actually romance that has fantastical elements, which it has been coming into much more prominence lately.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I don't belong on this panel because I definitely write the other one. Like my book is definitely a fantasy novel that has romance in it, but it's not a romance novel. And I love both. But I do think that there is some, and I think the three of us are really interesting because you were very clearly in romantasy. I am quite clearly in fantasy with romance. And I think you're kind of on the cusp there in between. So I think it's they're porous borders.
Keshe?
I actually think romantasy is something that has been around for a very long time, but done very, very well in the indie space. I think there's been self-published authors that have done romantasy for so many years now. And I remember when I started querying back in 2020, I remember looking at agents' sort of manuscript wish lists, and there was all this stuff like no vampires, no fae. We don't like that. We don't like romance combined with fantasy. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I was like, but there's so many authors that are doing so well in the indie space. And then I think what happened was, I think traditional publishing saw that there was just this voracious group of readers who were just eating up romantasy books. Some of them are reading a book a week, and they're like, oh, maybe we should cash in on that. So they coined this term, romantasy, and they're like, we've invented this new genre. And it's like, no, you did not invent the new genre. You took what was already very successful and you put a name on it and ran with it, which is it's amazing. It's really good that it's come into the forefront now, and it's now something that is so mainstream. But I think this is something that has been around for a very long time.
I think from an industry point of view, the boom really started with Fourth Wing and ACOTAR, A Court of Throne of Roses, and that all the publishers are desperately jumping on this bandwagon to catch up because it took them really unawares. And whereas the fans knew about this for years. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into that and get into some of the subgenres that work within it. So some of the tropes oh no, we'll talk about tropes in a bit, but the subgenres. So we've got haunted house, dark academia, we've got touching on inspiration from myths and legends. So Lili, yours is very squarely dark academia. Do you want to talk us through some of the subgenres you play with?
Sure. So I find dark academia fascinating because, like, unlike all of the other like subgenres that are to do with what the story is about, I feel like dark academia is really only about how it looks. Like, it's a really visual, it's an aesthetic, not a genre. And so it is very, like, it's very tweedy, it's very bookish, it's crumbly old libraries and you know, pens and cups of black coffee and a lot of angst. I think one of the reasons why it's so popular and particularly popular with young people is that it's extremely offline. Like, it's in these kind of academic places where you can explore ideas with other people in real life settings. And like, nobody has a mobile phone in dark academia. Like, it just doesn't belong in that world. And I think in this world where we are kind of in many ways forced to be constantly online and constantly viewed through screens, I think there's something very kind of liberating about that.
Oh, I've never heard that as a reason for dark academia. I love it. That makes so much sense. Now, Keshe, yours is YA, and as I sort of just said, a lot of the stuff with Romantasy can be quite adult and a bit spicy. So how do you find Romantasy works differently in the YA space?
So, I mean, I also write adult. So I have an adult sort of contemporary romantasy coming out in 2026, so next year. So I've sort of straddled both of those spaces, but I think the core of romance and the core of romantasy is really just that tension between the two love interests, whoever they may be, or multiple. Sometimes there's more than two. And so I think you can really distill that down in YA or adult because, yes, of course, like adult can stray into like the more spicy territory, but you've still got all of that yearning, you've got that angst, you've got like the conflict and the two people who want to be together but can't be for whatever reason, whether it's because they're both being jerks to each other, which often happens, or whether it's like extraneous circumstances. I think that's just like really the core of it. So I think like I found it quite easy to write in both YA and adult just because the very, very sort of like core nature of the two are very similar.
Mm-hmm. And then Alexandra, again, we're talking adult romantasy can be very spicy. Yours writing adult cozy romantasy. So is that something that you deliberately embraced or?
Deliberately, I didn't know what I was writing until I'd finished it. The
very, very common.
The cozy element though is something that I absolutely buy into, and also like it was written during COVID, and I think all of us needed a warm hug during COVID. So this element of tying into cozy, and it's not hugely explicit, although some of my friends are telling me that I've been hanging around with romance authors for too long because my idea of what explicit is and isn't is now apparently a bit skewed. But but you can be cozy and still have, sexual relations with the romantic interests and still be just really cozy and warm and everything's very feel good about it.
Yeah. And it is. Your book's very much like a big warm hug, which is nice after the darkness of the other two. Dark and spooky. Okay, we're going to talk now about our, I was going to say love interest, but we do all have heroes. Keshe, do you want to start talking us through, you've got a bit of a triangle happening in yours.
Yeah, I have a love triangle. I do love a love triangle, and I know some people have very mixed feelings about it, but my love triangles are always like a little bit weird because like in The Girl with No Reflection, it's basically the love triangle between the protagonist, her betrothed, who's like an arranged marriage, like basically a prince she's supposed to marry, and then his own reflection. So they look identical. So they're basically like the same person, but then the mirror versions of the real world people are usually quite different. They're almost the opposite. So she's got to like decide between, I guess, like the duty that she bought into when she was marrying into the royal family and like marrying, the main character, the main male character, or like his reflection, who is like better in a lot of ways when she first meets him. So yeah, I guess that was that. And then my next book coming up, which is another YA fantasy, is a love triangle between like an enemy prince and a ghost. So it's kind of like, I always have like something that's a little bit weird about my love interests.
Ooh, okay. We'll come back to this in a bit. But then Alexandra, talk us through your love interest hero.
So my point of view character is Oliver, and he was originally in a relationship with Genevieve, the person he's stuck there at the manor with. But that that didn't work out. So mainly because of Genevieve. She just didn't want actually any part of it. So she is rebelling the whole time. They're still best friends though, and they still do have a very strong connection. So the romantic interest here is his best friend Finn from 100 years ago. And I think this is a really interesting one because if they had lived out their lives, you know, in the early part of the 20th century, Finn and Oliver would never have got together. So Finn's quite clearly gay. He's always been gay. He's always known that he's gay. And Oliver didn't realise that he was bi until a long, like 50, 60 years later. And he would probably never have realised that because he would have got married and had kids and had a family and just never been a part of that world. So these two lovers finding each other, you know, 100 years after they first met. Oh, actually, let's be honest, they've been sleeping together 40 years without talking about whether it meant anything or not. But finding themselves 100 years later because of the changing circumstances that they find themselves in. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Lily, how about yours?
So obviously Paige is the protagonist, and then her love interest is Oak, who is the genderqueer fae boy who knits and talks to trees and wears a kilt. And he is the son. He's the first son to his mother is a very famous witch who like has 1 million Instagram followers, and like she's just a very popular witch who lives in a Scottish castle, and her initials are JKR, and that doesn't mean anything, but she she's a Dianistic witch who are like real rigid on gender, and so he is the first son born to this coven of witches in like 100 years, and she is not well pleased, and so she has refused to teach him any magic and has basically excommunicated him from the family, even though he's like, well, I don't really feel like I'm entirely a boy. But so he has sort of taught himself magic by sort of sneaking into her library, and so he talks to trees. He always has a little sprig of a particular herb pinned to his lapel, and he's just like very sensitive. And he and the protagonist first kind of bond because she has endometriosis and is having some very terrible period pain, and he makes her like a special magical herbal tea that helps. He's real sweet.
He is. Yeah. So staying with you, Lily, and staying on our heroes, he's not the traditional hero. He's sweet. He's making her remedies for period pain. This is a dream in many ways. Look at that agreement from the audience. Absolutely. So was this did he just arrive that way in your head, or did you deliberately sort of push against?
Yeah, so
something?
Originally he was going to be trans, and then I had a conversation with a trans friend, an author trans friend, and they were like, because I already had the idea about the mother who was sort of like, you know, you're not allowed to be in our witchy coven because you were trans. And then my friend was like, actually, it would be much more interesting if he was like more cisgendered and he's biologically male, and that's why she rejects him, because that feels like a subversion, because, you know, usually it's the other way around. Usually it's either trans people getting rejected or women getting rejected from kind of, you know, these dynasties. And so it sort of felt more interesting to do it that way. And then he sort of just became a little more genderqueer as time went on, because it just sort of matched his personality so well. But then I did want him to be like just quite soft and gentle and supportive, because Paige, the protagonist, has just been through some real bad stuff, and I just wanted someone who could just really nurture her and support her and love her sort of unconditionally in the way that she really needed. But of course, you know, circumstances, like you can't have a story where that's the only thing that happens, because like even in a cozy story, like we got to find ways to keep them apart. Yeah. So he's been keeping some secrets.
I go, oh, there's stuff I want to talk about, but, you know, we don't want spoilers. But the physicality of bodies is an interesting thing.
It sure
that
is.
Play with. Yeah. And it's a really great theme in Lily's book. So, Alexandra, you also don't have the traditional sort of hero with this relationship. It is one where it's the impediment is the reluctance to talk about feelings, but Finn himself is quite a mercurial character. Do you want to talk about him?
Yeah, he is. And Finn was actually the easiest character of all of them to write. So he came out of the pen and onto the page very, very clearly and very, very quickly. He's mercurial. He knows exactly who he is. He always has. He's always been, you know, really true to himself, and he's quite out there. And he loves everyone. He's very much an extrovert as well. And he's also, he knows that he's been in love with Oliver for a long time. So he's been quite aware of that. He's very self-aware. He's an interesting character because I think he's spent his life where he has been able to move around when Oliver and Genevieve has been stuck. And that's probably just as well because he might have died had he been stuck there with them. So he's been able to be out in the world, living his life and being the person that he wanted to be and gradually being able to become more openly the person that he wanted to be or always was as well. But yeah, his relationship with Oliver is probably what grounds him. Yeah.
And it's lovely. Now, Keshe, your hero, well, one of your two love triangle heroes, is the quintessential brooding, grumpy, comes across as horrible at the beginning, but very handsome. Do you want to talk more about both of them, really?
Yeah, I guess I probably don't want to spoil it, but it probably will spoil it anyway. I'm sorry. But there's obviously the two love interests. And I guess I'm writing for YA. So I wanted to, I guess, bring in an element of you can't always trust what people's first impressions are of, that you take. So when you meet someone, they might be so charismatic. They might love bomb you. They might just be so caring and lovely and extroverted. And you might just feel drawn to this person, but that might not necessarily be the full story. And the person who is more reticent and shy and introverted, they might not necessarily be showing you their full backstory either. So it was kind of just playing with that whole idea of you can't always trust on face value, because I think that's something that traditionally in a lot of books that I read growing up, it was always you meet this handsome prince and he's just so he just gives you so much and he's just worships the ground you walk on and he's just so charismatic and stuff, and then you fall in love and you live happily ever after. And I think we all kind of grew up with that whole, we're going to meet this person who we're just going to click with and it's going to be easy, and then they're going to just be this fantastic this fantastic love interest, and that's it. That was the full story. But I don't think that always works in real life, so I kind of wanted to show that in my writing. Yeah.
Brilliant. And you do that very well. Now, I sort of realise in all of this, we've talked about the heroes, the love interests, but let's dig a bit deeper into our point of view characters, the protagonists. So Keshe, working our way back again, talk more about and I will add, they all go on their journeys, in terms of growth emotionally, as well as the adventure that we read the story for. So tell us a little bit more about your protagonists.
So Ying came from a very, very sheltered upbringing. So she's this, this noble woman, I suppose, a princess who then gets sold into the royal family, but she grew up very, very sheltered. She grew up with all these older brothers, and she grew up with a good family. I didn't want it to be the typical I hate my parents kind of YA, but yeah, I guess the thing is she comes into this new environment and a world that's so expanded, and she's not prepared for it. So when she first comes, she's been this very, very coddled, the only daughter of this aristocratic family. So she comes in with all these expectations that she's just going to come and lord around, but it's not like that. So basically, the family, it is so much bigger than what she's used to, and then she's not treated very well there. And she has to go through a lot of growth because of that. So I didn't want to write a character that was, I guess, had everything on hand. I didn't want to write a character where she made all the best decisions, that she, did all the right things, that she was already very smart and capable. That's just not real life. I guess I based her on me as a teenager. I made a ton of very, very bad, questionable decisions. I was probably not the smartest teenager. Also, a lot of her character sort of traits are drawn from my character traits. So when people are I hate this character, it's okay, we're probably not going to be friends, but that's okay. But yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that, she had elements where she had flawed decision making, and that she was she made teenage decisions because she was impulsive, and she's young and she's very sheltered, and then goes into this world that she's not prepared for.
Yeah. Alexandra, talk more about Oliver.
So the starting point for Oliver's character was actually a discussion with my writers group about fairy tales and how disappointing fairy tales are when you grow up and you realise how problematic most of them are. And one we were talking about in particular was the Beauty and the Beast. And the discussion that we had was, what happens if a guy had a curse put on him and he didn't turn out to be a bastard? He didn't make that anybody else's problem but his own. And so that was the starting point of Oliver's character, was this is a person who is just he's a nice guy. And, you can't write a story about a nice guy, just that. But he is a genuinely nice person who has this thing happen to him, and he is not going to make that anybody else's problem but his own. And he's not going to try and they have all of these theories about how they might get out of the house, and he refuses to do anything that harms anybody else, which is a little bit problematic in his relationship with Genevieve, because she's like, by not doing everything you can to get us out of here, you are harming me. So it is a little bit of a challenge, but he's just fundamentally incapable of hurting anyone. He's very, very nurturing. He loves looking after people. So he grows, he's turned the veggie garden basically into a farm, a self-sustaining farm, and he likes to grow veggies and cook and look after all of the animals. And, he can't hurt anybody. It's just, is the way he is. And that nurturing is also a problem for him. That's one of the challenges, and one of the arcs that he goes on is trying to realize that he can't look after everybody all the time, that they have to take some control of their own lives as it goes.
Yeah. You're writing all three of you, writing a lot of wish fulfillment for us, which is lovely.
Yes. It's romantasy.
Yeah. I know. So nice. So Lily, talk a bit more about Paige and the journey she goes on.
So Paige is, I think you were touching on this, Keshe, that one of the really great joys of writing for young people is adolescence is such a time of intensity. It's often the first time you fall in love or the first time you get your heart broken, and that just makes it so much bigger and scarier. And so it's more fun to write about. But it also means that we don't want to read stories about perfect people. We want to read stories about, people who make mistakes and then try and make them better and try and learn from them and grow from them. And, that's for me what a good story. I want to read stories about hot messes, trying really hard to fix their problem, but maybe doing it the wrong way and making the problem worse. And that is absolutely what Paige is that she, feels a lot of feelings in the way that, I don't feel everybody feels more feelings when they're adolescents. When you're a teenager, everything feels bigger and more intense because it's just part of brain development, really. And so she feels so lonely, and she feels like she is this intellectual. She loses herself in classic literature, and she feels like where she lives, where she's grown up, nobody sees her. Her family don't really understand her. And so she's always just felt like an outcast, and she feels like maybe at this weird school, maybe this is the place where she'll belong, because everybody is like that. Everybody is an intellectual, and everybody is, making their own tarot cards and, playing word games where they're not allowed to say words that contain the letter E all day, and, just nonsense nerd stuff, and playing chaos chess, which is where you have a big bag of chess pieces and you just pull out random pieces to line your board with. So you might end up with one pawn but 5 queens, and that's how they play chess. And so they're just massive nerds who do nerd things. And so she really feels like she's going to belong here. And so she lets herself she's really closed her heart, and she lets herself open it up to this group of queer weirdos, and they're keeping secrets from her, but she is also keeping secrets from them. And there's just a lot of things that people haven't. Look, what if we just all sat down and told each other the truth? Then we wouldn't have a great story.
Exactly. It would have been over a lot more quickly. Yeah, without the mystery. Now, this is getting a bit industry, but it's very hard to talk about romantasy as a genre without talking about book talk. It's really driven the rise of sales. And one of the things we struggle with in Australia is Australian authors that don't have, book talk, American book talk behind them, don't really get noticed as much. So, please buy Australian authors, look out for them and go dig and explore. But Keshe and Lily, you both do also have the American deal. So I want to talk a bit more about how book talk may or may not influence your life and what you write. And starting with Keshe, how is US publication different from Australian publication?
Well, I think that we actually have a really thriving industry here. I think that, Penguin Australia, who published Girl with No Reflection Here and is publishing For No Mortal Creature, my next one, they are amazing. They're so good. They've looked after me so well. In terms of the US side, social media is very tricky. And I think there's a bit of duality here. I just want to say that I think a lot of times publishers expect you to be on social media. So there's an expectation there that you should be out there. But I don't know necessarily that in terms of readers seeing you on social media, I don't know that necessarily translates into sales, because I think that in terms of social media currency, things are a lot more trustworthy when they come from someone else. So if I'm on Book Talk and I'm sort of talking about my book, then that's not going to have as much social currency as a book talker picking up my book and then talking about it and saying this is great. And so I think think that from that point of view, I don't really know that Book Talk has like done a lot for me. But what it has done is that I think it's been a really great community builder for people in the industry. So for instance, my first book came out with Fairy Loot, which is like a subscription service. Some of you probably have Fairy Loot books or have Fairy Loot subscriptions. And the only reason that I got a Fairy Loot deal was because I was posting about my book on social media, and the head of Fairy Loot, Anissa, who founded Fairy Loot, who's from the UK, saw one of my, like basically my reels and slid into my DMs and was like, hey. And I was like, oh, okay, you're quite important in the book world. Hello. So I don't think without me sort of being out there and like, making connections with other publishing industry people as well as other authors, I don't think I would have had as many sort of like opportunities that I have had. So I think in terms of community building, but then it also has to be from a genuine place. Like I love meeting other authors. I love meeting industry people. I think I spoke to Alex like way back when I was querying. I loved that. I just love like sort of, making connections with other creative people, because I was not in the creative space for so many years. I went and did vet science, and I specialized in cat medicine, which is also a very, very niche sort of area, which is also full of very intense, nerdy people. But like I was not in the creative community for so many years. And so coming into it, I was just like, oh my gosh, I found my people. And so like, it's a genuine place. Like, it's not like we go on social media to be like, I want to sell books and I want to like, climb the bookish social ladder. It's sort of more just that I genuinely really love talking to other authors, and I love talking to industry people. And I'm just so interested in how things work. So like talking to Alex was just like, oh my God, I just love like pulling back the curtain and being like, what happens back there? So yeah, it's really just got to come from a genuine place. And so that's the thing, like we are expected to be on social media from our publishers. They're like, you have to be like, on social media of some description, you have to have some presence. But like, I don't want to get on there and sell books. I want to go in there and build a community. So.
Which is the poster child answer. That's what we need. We need community, and unless you're being authentic on there, it really falls flat. Alexandra, you've got the Australian publication, came out a few months ago. How are you going with community and the curse and blessing of social media?
Yeah, I have an absolutely amazing writing community that has been built up over the sort of 6-7 years that I've been writing. So lots and lots of writing support communities, and social media. Look, if publishers were looking to me for my social media to sell my books, they would be sadly disappointed. That's not how it's happening. But I think, Keshe, what you're saying is absolutely true. It's not how you sell books, but it is how, you can be authentic in yourself. And but to be honest, the community that I've found is much more a writer's community than a reader's community at this stage.
Yeah, which is a lovely way to build it. Now, Lili, this is your third, Unhallowed Halls is your third book into the US. And so over the last few years, how have you seen things change, and how does social media work with Australian and US publication for you?
Yeah, I think things have changed a lot, certainly over the last 5 or 10 years. I feel like about 10 years ago, like Twitter was a really like a great place for authors in particular, right? For authors in particular, because like the thing about Twitter, at least old school Twitter, was that it was very much like it facilitated conversation and interaction. Whereas I find that your Instagram and your TikTok it's not as collaborative, it's not as interactive. It's very much just like, look at my thing and I will look at your thing, but that's not a conversation. And so I feel like we've kind of lost that. And I was talking to some people in my writers group recently that it's harder and harder for us to get to know like the newer debut writers. And it's not like because we're being cliquey, because Australian publishing has never been like that, but like we just genuinely don't know them. And I was like, why don't we know them? And I was like, oh, it's because we don't have Twitter anymore, so we don't get to know them in that kind of organic way. And because we have so many more publishers now, so many people, who are coming in with American book deals that are being distributed here, we don't have that same kind of granular network that we used to when the industry was much smaller. And so it is harder, I think, now to build those communities. And I feel like with Book Talk, when it started, it was great because before Book Talk, the books that sold 1 billion copies were the ones that the publishers decided, like, these books are the ones that are going to sell 1 billion copies. And so we're going to put all of our marketing money into these books. And Book Talk broke that. And it was like, so it became this kind of democratization of book selling, where it was like actually books that people loved, not books by celebrities that the publisher wanted to make a lot of money from. But I feel like in the last 3 years, it's kind of come back around the other way, that we are still in a pattern where it is only this really small group of books that everybody is buying. And I feel like more than before, we are losing mid-list titles, and that mid-list title, like it's just these superstars selling, you know, millions of copies, and then everyone else in the middle kind of gets lost because, you know, it's so hard to break through on BookTok because it is a really small number of titles that everybody reads and talks about.
Yeah. Once that wheel starts in motion, everyone jumps on that book bandwagon.
Yeah, and if your book isn't on that wheel, then it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and that's really tough.
Yeah, and it's become really kind of self-fulfilling that now if you go into a bookshop, they've got a BookTok section, and so it just becomes this kind of, like a snake eating its own tail.
Yeah, which is to say, dig deeper, people. Yeah, come to things like this. Buy these wonderful books. Now, okay, so moving on from the sometimes depressing world of the industry, this is the question I've been gunning for the whole time. I want to talk about favourite tropes. I love tropes in romance and fantasy. Now, for those who don't know, tropes are, a common theme or device or a cliche, like enemies to lovers, like Han and Leia in Star Wars, or, let's split up and go in different directions in a horror movie. These are tropes that the genre plays with. So I'd love you guys, starting with Lili this time. What are your favourite tropes and how have you maybe incorporated them or not into your own books?
I love an enemies to lovers, or particularly a rivals to lovers. I love my previous YA, Deep is the Fen, is a rivals to lovers that I just really, really enjoyed kind of digging into. I also love, and that book has this as well, like a very spoilt brat, rich, incredibly privileged child or young person who has had, everything go his way for his whole life, just have to team up with like just a sassy, sensible girl who is just not going to take any of his bullshit and is just in no way impressed by him. Love that. And then the one that I haven't written yet, but I would really like to, is like the Encino Man trope of like someone who's a complete fish out of water. I don't know. I'm sure there's a better name for it than Encino Man. But
that's now.
Like someone from 500 years ago has to like survive now or vice versa. And just like, I just am fascinated by that. I often just when I'm driving my car, just like fantasize about having like Jane Austen in the car with me and being like having to explain like road rules to her. And like, just there's something about it that just really grabs in my brain.
Awesome. Alexandra, how about you?
Well, obviously friends to lovers, because Oliver only has 2 main lovers and both of them are friends. So clearly that's a trope that we were always going to have. Forced proximity is another one that comes out. They're stuck together and having to deal. The haunted house trope, and I kind of feel like I wanted to turn that on its head as well, because it is a haunted house and it is under a curse, but actually it's in a really beautiful way, and the magic is trying to look after them within the constraints of the curse. So yeah, I like playing with tropes and kind of turning them on their head. So a little bit.
Yeah. That's one of the joys of knowing what they are and subverting them a little. Keshe, how about you? What are your favourites?
Yeah, so I also eat up the enemies to lovers, rivals to lovers. I think almost everyone probably says that. And I love a good betrayal trope as well. But one thing that came about quite organically in my writing that I only just recently realised when I was making like TikToks for my books is that I'm a very, very big sucker for the only one /bed/ anything trope. I love that. And I don't know whether any of you have read Stephanie Garber's A Curse for True Love, but in like the map, they actually have like the only one bed in the map. It's on the arrow saying only one bed. And I was just like, oh my God, you get us. Totally. But yeah, I have only one bed trope in my first book. And then the second book has an only one horse and an only one branch trope. And then my adult book has an only one dragon trope. So I seem to have this recurring thing where I it's forced proximity, but it's the only one thing.
Oh, lovely. They're so much fun. So we'll be taking questions from the audience very soon. So if people want to, when they're asking their question, throw in their favourite trope, we could, have a bit of a game with the audience. Now, officially the title of this panel is Romantasy, Hopes and Tropes. And I've got to say, the world's facing kind of dark times at the moment. So during dark times, we often turn to hopeful genres like romance and fantasy, romance with its happy endings, fantasy with its good versus evil, for inspiration. So what are you seeing across our genre that's giving you hope? Keshe?
Well, I think that one thing about romantasy is that often our main characters, whether they be women or non-binary characters or trans women or whoever, they have a lot of agency. And I think that that's something that we really need in today's world. And I think more than ever, I think initially, like my book is set in, well, not set in Imperial China. It draws inspiration from Imperial China, but it's no way, like it's not historical. So I basically just made a whole lot of shit up in my head and mashed it together. Sorry for the swearing. But yeah, I sort of, wanted to write a character that like society dictated didn't have agency, but then took agency and took her own sort of, I guess, destiny into her own hands. And at the time that I was like pitching it, I was like, well, maybe we don't need this so much anymore, but we very much do now. And I think it's getting even worse, like with current political climates. I think that we need to see, our characters being able to, break out of the shackles of the society that society is trying to put on them. At the same time, also have characters that make you period, potions and characters that care for you. And I think it's very much, I think you mentioned wish fulfillment. Mm-hmm. It very much is, because it's we all want, my husband is a total cinnamon roll. He makes me a tea every morning and leaves it on the bench before he leaves for work. I want to write those characters into my books. I want to have those the main characters being cared for and being respected, and basically having someone on their knees for them, essentially. I think that brings a lot of hope, And I guess one thing I want to say is just that writing for teenagers is such a privilege, because teenagers are amazing. I come across teenagers that read my books, and I come across teenagers in my general life, and they are going to be the ones that change the world. They are the ones that they're so open-minded, and they have, they're so accepting of diversity and embrace you can just say this person is non-binary and they're like, yeah, cool. Okay. It's not a thing for them. Whereas it's more the powers that be at the moment that are trying to change that. But I think that we need to speak directly to teenagers, because they can handle so much stuff. They can handle darkness, and they can handle lightness, and they can handle sex, and they can handle so many things that I think a lot of adults think they can't. And so I feel like it's a privilege to be able to talk directly to teenagers. I don't know if there's any teenagers in the audiences. If you are, I love you. You're going to be the ones that change the world. I feel like I am just so lucky to be able to be a tiny part of your world. And yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Oh, thank you. Alexandra, how about you?
When I was growing up, dystopia was my absolute favourite genre. So 1984, it's my book of my childhood. I thought that was the best thing ever. And I just can't
great
read
childhood classic. It's like Winnie the Pooh, 1984, Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, and I just can't do it anymore. I really struggle with dystopian in any way, shape, or form. It's I can read the news, and that's all that I need. And so when I was writing Thoroughly Disenchanted, I was writing what I wanted to read, which is, to a certain extent, it's escapism, but it's in the real world. I'm writing real world that just has just enough magic and people who are nice to each other. Mm-hmm. and it's really, that's what I love to read. And I just have this, my bookshelves are now full of books that are about hope and people who care for each other and accept differences, and where diversity is just accepted as the way forward. So yeah.
No, that's lovely. And I think that's what the world is turning to, because we're not seeing it in reality.
Although, having said that, I have heard that the latest trends coming out of America, which is about, they're 2 years ahead, they're 100 years behind us in almost every way, but they're 2 years ahead of us in terms of book themes, horror and dark romance. And that frightens
and
the life out of me.
And you guys are hearing dystopias coming back?
No, I don't think dystopia ever left. I think that for teenagers in particular, and every school I go to, when I ask kids what they are reading, they're always reading dystopia. They still have the Hunger Games. And I'm like, well, this makes sense, because high school is a dystopia. You have to wear particular clothes. They tell you what to think. All your movements are controlled by the ringing of bells. And you have no power to change anything. It's absolutely dystopia, and teenagers are naturally, by our political systems, are powerless, are politically disenfranchised. And so no wonder they are drawn to stories where a young person gets to take back some of their power.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what your writing feeds into?
Yeah.
Hope or not?
I absolutely agree with both of you on diversity. I wrote a book nearly 17 years ago called Pink, which was a queer YA story at a time where there were almost no queer YA stories in Australia. And it was hugely controversial at times. It's a very vanilla story about, the girl in it is actually, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a very, very sweet romance, queer romance about High School Musical theatre. But it was massively controversial. It was banned in a lot of schools. Of course, it's still banned in some states in the United States. But now it is studied on curriculums in Catholic schools. The world has changed so much in that quite short period of time, and the way that teenagers talk absolutely has just changed so much, and the way that they look at the world and the way that they are accepting of difference is just so beautiful to see. And I absolutely agree. It's a huge privilege to write for young people. And it's also, I find it a really huge responsibility as well. And so I really feel that responsibility of making sure that the stories that I write reflect the world that I live in and all of the people who live in that world. And I think that can be it's challenging sometimes, but I think it's really important. And it's also really important in romance. There's this weird thing when it comes to writing for young people that I think some of the really popular romantasy books out there for adults can be sometimes a little problematic in the way that they approach, I see some nodding out there, some gender stuff and issues around consent. And I think that particularly when you're writing for teenagers, we have a responsibility to model really positive depictions of what a good relationship is. And if we are depicting relationships that are not like that, we need to call them out for being bad and model that. And so I feel that is a really big responsibility. And I don't want to be didactic. I don't want to be this is what you should do and this is what you should do, because there's nothing a teenager hates more than being told what to think. But I do think it's important to model consent and to model, safe sex and just all of those sorts of things to be able to show what a positive, healthy relationship should look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. And I think all of you are doing that so well, which can offset some of the adult books the teens maybe shouldn't be reading, but not in a should way. Now, do we have any questions from the audience? Does anyone want to shoot their hand up? The question is, do any tropes die out? And I think
I can probably speak on this one because love triangles are quite controversial. So, I grew up in the era of reading old school YA where there was always a love triangle between a dark-haired brooding character and a golden retriever, blonde, man. And unfortunately, my second book is a bit like that. But one of them is a ghost, so that's okay. But it was modeled on Wuthering Heights, so I kind of it's been going on for that long, that love triangle sort of with the dark versus light. Yeah, but it's not a very popular trope anymore. I think a lot of people, when I sort of cruise around book talk and stuff like that, a lot of people are I hate love triangles. And I was well, some of them are good.
I just hate bad ones.
Please just read my book. But yeah, and also another one that I hear people really hate is the pregnancy trope in romance. People just hate their main characters getting pregnant. I don't know why.
I think it's the surprise pregnancy trope that people don't like. Not pregnancy in general.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's not very romantic to have a kid because I've got 2 children and Lily's got, I don't know.
Nothing romantic.
There's nothing romantic about it. Yes, I'm pretty sure I have been thrown up into my mouth before, so it's not very pleasant.
Yeah. I'd say I'd love to say dubious consent is a trope that's going, but sadly it's not.
Yeah, literal bodice ripping is maybe don't,
yeah,
don't
and
do
the
that.
really toxic heroes, they are still around, but maybe less mainstream. But great question.
Well, I really just found a lot of people online to begin with. So before I met sort of Lili and Alexandra and some of the local writers, I was just online a lot, probably too much. And unfortunately, a lot of it was initially Twitter, but I'm on Discord now. So I just sort of find Discord servers and join them. I've joined way too many, more than I can keep up with. But yeah, and then sometimes I actually find Australian writers on these international Discords and then I'm let's meet up. And sometimes I meet them at a radio station like I did with Amanda, which is not so easy to do. But yeah, in terms of the best fiction and non-fiction, that is such a tricky question. I mean, I loved Lily's Deep is the Fen. So, you should definitely buy that. That's a YA fantasy about a toad community. It's very
romantic.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. I love that little love interest there. I love the Emily Wilde series. It's an adult series. I am obsessed with that one because I think like I said, I did vet science, so I love anything that has like that sort of academia, nerdy, STEM-based thing. I've also just read Bridget Knightley's The Irresistible Urge to Fall in Love with Your Enemy. It's another STEM-based fantasy based on Dramani fan fiction. And I loved that one. So anything STEM-based, Ali Hazelwood, all that sort of stuff. Nonfiction, I don't really read nonfiction. I read veterinary textbooks, but no one wants to know about that. So I will not mention it.
Alexandra?
So in terms of finding your tribe, most of my writing tribe is actually found through doing lots and lots of courses and conferences as learning how to write and getting things. Romance Writers of Australia is one of the best supportive communities that you could be a part of. My writers group, which is a group of 6 of us who've been meeting once a month for sort of 4 years, we met doing a course together and just have stayed in touch and finding those people is amazing and really, really helps both with your writing but also with, coping with the downtimes and the, everything else that goes on. And I have another author who's going through the same journey as me in terms of in my writers group as a debut author in Australia and, supporting each other. And the other way is actually through another group that I've found is through a network of fans of Keshe Chow. So Keshe Chow is partly answering your second question as well. Keshe Chow is my favourite author. She writes the most amazing queer romance fiction, mostly historical, that she does. She's got at least one fantasy one in there. They're absolutely extraordinary and beautiful. And there's this community, it was a Facebook group, it's now a Discord server, of people just to basically fangirl about her books, and she comes in there as well. And there was a group, someone said, is anybody based in Melbourne? Do you want to catch up? And we all caught up and it turned out we were all writers. So as well. So she's like a writer's author, which is amazing. So anything by Keshe Chow. And then the absolute best novel that I've read recently is by Alexandra Almond. It's called Yield Under Great Persuasion. And I love it because it's set in a fantasy world. There's not a great deal of magic fantasy happening, but I just love it because it's the opposite of a miscommunication trope, as in these are two people who have been miscommunicating for many, many years, but the start of the story is where they actually figure out they need to communicate. So the entire book is about how they learn to talk to each other. Ooh. It is so good.
Ooh. Okay. Lily, how about you?
In terms of writers groups, I absolutely agree. Like doing courses, doing, the Australian Society of Authors is great. Writers Victoria is great. Your local public library will possibly be running things as well. And just like find your people that way. And like if you sort of feel like you're clicking with someone, get their details. And so a lot of I think the best writers groups like kind of grow organically in that way of just like meeting people organically. And then they will, this person will know someone and that's always the best way to do it. And it is such a valuable thing. And the Melbourne literary community, the Victorian literary community is extremely strong, extremely active and extremely friendly. So it's just about going to events and sort of just meeting people. So that's that one. And then I have been devouring T. Kingfisher's Romantasy books.
It's so good.
It's the best. I just want to be her when I grow up. And so I'm reading her Paladin series at the moment that I'm just loving so much. And then I also do not read a lot of nonfiction, but I will give you a literary fiction instead. I am reading The Axeman's Carnival, which is a New Zealand book. And I've forgotten the name of the author, but it was like New Zealand Book of the Year a couple of years ago. And it is entirely narrated by a magpie who falls out of the nest and is rescued by like a woman on a farm. It's so good. It's very strange. Content warning for domestic violence, but it is like, I'm just loving it. Audiobook in particular, excellent.
Wow. Okay, we've just mentioned some of my favourite writers. I would just add, as an industry person, having a writers group is one of the best things an emerging writer can do. You grow together. Look, I've heard some horror stories of toxicity in them, but generally 99% positive. And I love seeing like one person in the writers group will get a publishing deal and then the next and then the next, and everybody grows together.
And it's quite like when you're starting out, the industry can be quite opaque. It's like a really old-fashioned industry that is strange. And so to have people who you can negotiate it with is invaluable.
Oh, it really is. It's a fickle industry. You need people who've got your back. Now, we probably have time for one more question if there is one.
I am definitely a plotter, and I always do like a double outline, like one for the plot of the story and then one for the romance as well, and to make sure that those kind of beats line up. And so I quite enjoy that process of just making sure that the romance flows and the drama flows both in, mutually satisfying ways. In terms of tropes, I usually will start off with a few ideas of like how the romance is going to unfold, and then after that, I think it comes pretty organically. I don't list out tropes and then put them in. Maybe I should.
Could not be more opposite. I start writing to see what happens. I wrote I wrote 5 practice books in the 6 years before thoroughly Disenchanted, where I was learning to write. And because I was doing all of these courses, and so many of them are about how to plot your novel, so I learnt that and I plotted a novel. And like in my trajectory of my first novel was here, second novel so much better, third novel so much better. The one I plotted, worse than the first one. So for me, it absolutely 100% doesn't work. Thoroughly Disenchanted, I literally started with the idea of Oliver got cursed, isn't a bastard. Started writing and everything else grew. And I also, I had some ideas at the back of my mind. He's going to be stuck there with someone. They're probably the love interest. So Genevieve was going to be his love interest. It just didn't work out. She didn't play and everything grew from there. It means I rewrite a lot. So my process is usually to write, realise what happens and go back and change stuff so that makes sense, and then write a bit I have to. So it's looping as I go.
Yeah. Keshe?
I'm also completely a pantser by nature. So all of my favourite books have just been written, but I have been forced to become a plotter, because what happens when you sell a book to a publisher, you often then, they need to have the first look at your next book, but they look at a proposal, and a proposal is usually a bunch of sample chapters and an outline. And when I first heard that I had to do an outline, I think I almost cried. I was like, I do not want to do an outline. It took me so long to do this. I finally did an outline. I sent it in, and then it unfortunately did make the writing process faster and easier when I wrote the rest of the book. But then I deviated quite significantly from the outline, because I was like, oh, what happens if this happened? And when my editor read it, she's like, oh my God, what did you do with that ending? And I'm like, I'm really sorry. I'm just I'm not in my nature a rule follower.
Brilliant. Okay, we are out of time, I'm afraid. Now, all of these 3 authors are going to be signing books in the readings tent. Their books are for sale. Support the Australian writing industry and join me in thanking, these amazing panellists.
Clunes Booktown Festival is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativeclunes.org.au. This podcast has been made possible due to the generous support of the Hugh Williamson Foundation.